New York, a cold morning in early 2014. Inside a small West Village apartment, Philip Seymour Hoffman, the man Hollywood revered as the very soul of acting, was found motionless beside pages of an unfinished script. The news spread within minutes, but the haunting question lingered for years. Why would a genius at the peak of his craft, adored by the world, die alone at 46? Philip Seymour Hoffman spent his whole life under the spotlight, yet somehow he seemed to belong more to the darkness. He embodied characters filled with pain, chaos, and loneliness so completely that people assumed he was merely acting. But the truth was the opposite. Every role carried a piece of his soul, a piece he could never reclaim. This is not the story of a fallen star. This is the journey of a soul far too sensitive, in a world far too loud. Philip Seymour Hoffman was born on July 23, 1967, in Fairport, a quiet, sun-washed town in New York, where small streets glowed warmly, yet his memories of childhood were filled with shadows that words could never fully capture. His parents divorced when he was still very young. That silent fracture in the family planted an emptiness inside him, an emotional void that would follow Hoffman throughout his entire life. He grew up with his mother, a strict yet deeply empathetic judge. She often took him to the local theater where the stories on stage became his only refuge. Hoffman was a sensitive, soft-spoken child, always observing others with a gaze that seemed to pierce through their surface, searching for what they were trying to hide. For a time, he immersed himself in sports, especially basketball, but a severe injury at 14 forced him off the court. What seemed like a loss turned out to be destiny. Hoffman joined his school's drama program, and he discovered that his emotions, the fears, the loneliness, the empty spaces inside him, could all be transformed into power on stage. It was that fragile childhood, the broken family, and his overwhelming sensitivity that created a Philip Seymour Hoffman unlike anyone Hollywood had ever seen. An actor who didn't just play a role, but lived inside the cracks of every character he touched. When Philip Seymour Hoffman stepped into his 20s, acting had already become the only place where he truly felt he belonged. He studied at NYU Tisch, a world where young, ambitious artists fought to prove themselves through every line they delivered. But Hoffman was different. He didn't try to draw attention. It was his quietness that made people look at him longer. In those early years, Hoffman took on very small roles, sometimes appearing on screen for only a few seconds. Yet every time he showed up, his eyes carried something unsettled, deeper, more real than the performances of actors trying hard to impress. Young directors quickly recognized a truth. Hoffman didn't play his characters. He stepped inside them, lived within their wounds, as if borrowing his own pain to breathe life into theirs. His first major opportunity came when he appeared in Scent of a Woman, 1992. It was a supporting role, but the way Hoffman used silence, confused glances, and the smallest gestures to reveal vulnerability made him more memorable than characters who had far more dialogue. It was the moment Hollywood began to take notice of this quiet young man with extraordinary depth. In the years that followed, Hoffman worked tirelessly, accepting any role that allowed him to feed his passion. From independent films to projects most people would forget. Yet in each of those roles, he left a trace behind, the imprint of a soul that saw the world differently, more intensely, more heavily. His fire for acting didn't come from the ambition to be famous, but from a hunger to understand human beings. And that very hunger is what carried Hoffman deeper into the path toward becoming an icon of complex, emotionally layered roles. When Philip Seymour Hoffman entered his 30s, something extraordinary began to happen. He was no longer the guy who plays strange supporting roles, but the actor every director desperately wanted in their film. Boogie Nights, Magnolia, The Big Lebowski. Every time Hoffman appeared on screen, audiences didn't see Philip Seymour Hoffman. They saw an entirely different human being. Fragile, wounded, sometimes so heartbreakingly vulnerable that viewers fell silent. Hoffman wasn't handsome by Hollywood standards, nor did he possess the kind of appearance that made the public swoon. But that was exactly what made him special. He brought to the screen characters no one else dared to touch. Twisted souls, broken psyches, and sometimes downright unlikable people. And Hoffman portrayed them with a brutal honesty. No false technique, no forced expressions, just a man stripping his soul bare in front of the camera. And then, in 2005, Capote arrived like destiny. Hoffman didn't simply play Truman Capote, he became Truman Capote. The delicate breaths, the high-pitched voice, the small, almost fragile posture, the vanity, the vulnerability, and the haunted corners the writer tried so hard to conceal. People said Hoffman didn't act Capote, he lived an entire lifetime as Capote during filming. His Best Actor Oscar was not a surprise. It was the inevitable result of a complex mechanism, innate talent, hypersensitivity that bordered on painful, a cultural moment, craving authenticity, and a Hollywood that rarely found someone willing to plunge so deeply into a character's inner world. Hoffman's brilliance wasn't the blinding shine of a typical star. It was a slow, burning fire, spreading like embers beneath ash, steady, powerful, and impossible to extinguish. But every light has its shadow. As Hollywood called his name again and again, as audiences began to see Hoffman as the only one who can do this, the pressure on his shoulders grew heavier. And at the very height of his career, the cracks inside him began to widen, signaling the arrival of a darker chapter waiting just ahead. Behind the spotlight, Philip Seymour Hoffman lived a private life that was surprisingly simple. He didn't enjoy parties, didn't care for red carpets, and had little interest in fame. What mattered most to him was a small apartment, an old wooden table, a few pages of script, and the laughter of his 3 children. With Mimi O'Donnell, the woman who stayed by his side for over a decade, Hoffman found a rare kind of peace, a home that did not require him to perform, did not expect him to be strong. He could be exhausted, he could be silent, he could be shattered, and Mimi would still be there, the only anchor in the growing storm inside his heart. But it was during those seemingly peaceful years that the storm quietly formed. His overwhelming sensitivity, the very thing that had made Hoffman a remarkable actor, also made him more vulnerable than anyone realized. He often felt he was not good enough, that every compliment was temporary, and that one day Hollywood would discover he was nothing more than a man pretending to be talented. His 3 children were Hoffman's greatest joy. But at times, watching them play in the living room, he felt a vague terror, the fear that he wouldn't be the father they needed, that he wouldn't stay sober, that he wouldn't overcome the fractures inside his own soul. The more he loved his family, the more he feared losing them. And the more he feared losing them, the stronger the darkness inside him grew. That was the cruel paradox of artists with hypersensitive hearts. They love this life so deeply that their very love becomes a wound that never fully heals. While the world was praising Hoffman as an actor without limits, at home, Mimi began noticing small signs, the distant looks, the sleepless nights. the unusually long silences. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the wind had begun to blow. There was one thing Philip Seymour Hoffman tried to hide his entire life. He had struggled with alcohol and drug addiction when he was very young. It was a foggy chapter he rarely spoke about. But after getting sober at 22, Hoffman remained clean for 23 years, a remarkable feat for anyone who has ever battled addiction. He believed he had left that darkness behind, but the truth was never that simple. When his career entered its most brilliant period after Capote, the pressure grew in ways no one could have predicted. Every role Hoffman took required him to dig so deeply into the human psyche that it became painful. He embodied characters who were lonely, psychotic, guilty, fractured, and somewhere along the way, the line between the characters and the man himself began to blur. By 2012, Mimi O'Donnell noticed the first signs. Hoffman seemed exhausted, restless, his eyes drifting into long, empty silences. He admitted he had taken a single drink, something he had resisted for more than 2 decades. And with just one small crack, the darkness he thought he had defeated came rushing back, stronger, more dangerous than ever. Hoffman checked himself into rehab multiple times during 2012-2013. He tried to start over each time, but every time he walked out of the center, he seemed a little weaker, a little more worn down, a little more terrified of failing. Hollywood had no idea. They only saw a genius who appeared flawless on screen. Only at home did Mimi see the truth. A man fighting himself every day, every hour. By late 2013, Hoffman had fully relapsed. The small bags later found in his apartment revealed a devastating truth. He had fought, he had struggled, but the darkness was too strong, stronger than awards, stronger than talent, and sometimes stronger even than the love of a family. On February 2nd, 2014, Hoffman was found dead in his West Village apartment. Surrounding him were dozens of small packets of narcotics, used syringes still uncleaned, and a script he had been working on. The coroner concluded it was a lethal mix of heroin, cocaine, benzodiazepines. But for those who loved him, the real cause ran much deeper. Philip Seymour Hoffman did not die because of drugs. He died because a soul that sensitive could no longer bear the weight of itself. And because the world applauded for too long, without noticing the man who was breaking right in front of them. The death of Philip Seymour Hoffman didn't just shock Hollywood. It left behind an emptiness that those closest to him had to learn to live with, even though none of them were truly prepared. For Mimi O'Donnell, it wasn't just the loss of a partner. It was the pain of years spent watching the man she loved slowly sink. Like a boat riddled with cracks she had no power to mend. In an interview years later, Mimi said a single sentence that made the world fall silent. "I watched him disappear little by little, and I couldn't hold on to him." Their 3 young children were far too small to understand why their father wasn't coming home. But that grief, over time, became a quiet shadow clinging to their childhood. Faint, undefined, yet impossible to escape. For Hollywood, Hoffman's passing felt like a warning. A great actor, no scandals, no enemies, no reckless lifestyle, yet he still fell. It forced the film industry to confront an uncomfortable truth. The most sensitive, most authentic artists are often the ones who need help the most. And sometimes, they hide their suffering so deeply that no one can reach it in time. Colleagues who had worked with Hoffman, Joaquin Phoenix, Paul Thomas Anderson, Amy Adams, all said that after his death, they viewed acting differently. They idealized it less, and understood that diving too deeply into a character's soul comes with a terrifying cost. Hoffman's death wasn't just a personal tragedy, It was a reminder that art can soar, but the human beings behind it are always more fragile than we think. And sometimes geniuses don't fall because they are weak, but because they feel life far too deeply. After Philip Seymour Hoffman's passing, the final films he worked on continued production. The Hunger Games used special techniques to preserve his character, as if to say, even though Hoffman was gone, his creative spirit still lived on in every frame. And when those scenes finally appeared in theaters, the audience fell silent, not only for Plutarch Heavens Be, but for the overwhelming feeling that Hoffman had returned, gentle and powerful, as if he had never left. What was strange and beautiful was that after his death, an entire generation of young actors began speaking about Hoffman more than ever before. Joaquin Phoenix, Paul Dano, Jesse Eisenberg all admitted that what they learned from Hoffman wasn't technique, but a way of seeing the world with absolute honesty. He taught them that playing a character wasn't about performing. It was about feeling, about touching the layers of emotion that everyday life rarely allows. Acting schools began using Hoffman's scenes as lessons in purity of performance. No embellishment, no forced intensity, no attempts to please the audience, just the raw truth of an open soul. That is what created a unique form of rebirth. Hoffman no longer exists in body, yet his roles live more vividly than ever. His family, Mimi and their 3 children, chose to preserve Hoffman's memory with quiet dignity. No media theatrics, no disappearing into grief. They kept living, just as Hoffman had always wanted, quietly, honestly, fully. And in its own way, that too was a kind of rebirth, a reminder that love and memory can outlive tragedy. Philip Seymour Hoffman does not return in physical form, but he returns every time a young actor dares to go deeper into a role. He returns every time an audience sees a truthful look on screen and wonders, who else could have done this, if not Hoffman? As the noise surrounding the tragedy slowly faded, Philip Seymour Hoffman's life became a mirror reflecting a truth every artist must confront. The greater the talent, the more fragile the soul. Those who had worked with him, who had seen the way he threw himself into roles as if trading pieces of his own breath, began to understand that the price of authenticity can be far more brutal than anyone expects. Hoffman once said a short but haunting line, "I don't act to be liked. I act to understand people, even the parts I'm most afraid of." Perhaps that was what made his life both beautiful and painful. He went further than most because he dared to look into the shadows others avoided. But that same gaze drained him like a diver who descends too deep and cannot return to the surface in time. In the years after his passing, many began reflecting on the thin line between art and the self, between embodying someone else's pain and learning how to save your own life. Hoffman left behind unforgettable performances, but he also left a quiet lesson. Sometimes, what we need is not to keep being strong, but to know when to stop, when to seek help, when to simply say, "We are tired." Some actors enter history through glory, some through scandal, but Hoffman left something different, an emptiness, a kind of silence that lingers long after he's gone. And in that silence, we understand something simple. Geniuses are not born to conquer. They are born to feel. And that feeling, raw, vulnerable, overwhelming, and is the most beautiful legacy Philip Seymour Hoffman gave to the world. As this story comes to a close, we can picture Philip Seymour Hoffman sitting alone in the empty seats of an old theater. The lights have dimmed, the curtain has fallen, yet his presence the characters he embodied, those eyes that once held so many unspoken truths, still lingers in the air like a quiet, unending whisper. Hoffman never lived like a movie star. He lived like a man searching for the essence of humanity, even when that very journey exhausted him to the point he could no longer move forward. But perhaps that is exactly why he will never be forgotten. His honesty made his performances not just worth watching, but worth feeling. Some people appear and then fade away. Others remain with us like the last note of a symphony, soft but never extinguished. Philip Seymour Hoffman was one of those people. If today's story made you pause, if it reminded you of a performance, a look, or simply a beautiful feeling Hoffman once gave you, keep that for yourself. The truest things always find a way to outlive time. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Which Philip Seymour Hoffman performance stayed with you the most? Share it, because those memories are what keep art alive. And if you want to journey with us through the next stories, through the emotional lives of the extraordinary souls of cinema and music, please like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next story.